Okay, you know how we all use money every day? But
Yeah.
did you know, like, a $10 bill only lasts for, like, 5 years?
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, and a $100 bill. It can circulate for, like, almost 23 years.
That's fascinating. I never really thought about it like that.
Right. It's pretty crazy when you think about all the places those bills must have been.
Definitely makes you wonder about the journeys they've taken.
Exactly. And that's just scratching the surface. Today, we're diving deep into the world of money.
It's good.
You've brought a really interesting collection of stuff, and we're going to unpack it all. From the surprisingly durable nature of those bills we were just talking about to the mind-boggling complexity of modern payment systems.
It's amazing how money has changed over time.
Right, and it keeps changing. Our goal today is to help you understand the bigger picture of what money actually is and how it works in our world. So much more than just buying stuff.
Absolutely. And I think what's really cool about the material you've gathered is the variety. We have everything from like fun facts about money to some deeper philosophical questions about its role in our lives. Yeah. Then there's the practical stuff too, like a review of an app for making money online.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
And then there's the academic side with papers exploring the history of money and how cash and digital payments are used across different countries.
And we even have a report on why people use bank accounts in the first place, like what drives those decisions.
Right. It's going to be a really interesting mix.
It is. Forget those boring economics textbooks. We're going to uncover some surprising details, trace the evolution of money through history, and even talk about the psychology behind how we as humans relate to it.
The psychology of money is such a fascinating area.
It is. Get ready for some aha moments, folks.
I'm sure there will be plenty of those.
Okay, let's start with something everyone's familiar with, the physical stuff, the cash in your wallet.
The tangible side of money.
Exactly, the bills and coins. So, according to the U.S. Currency Education Program, that $1 bill you might have tucked away will last about 6.6 years.
Interesting.
But a $5 bill, shorter lifespan, only about 4.7 years.
I guess that makes sense. Fives probably get used more often.
Right. Think about it. Making change, everyday purchases.
Hmm.
And remember that $10 bill we talked about at the very beginning? Just 5.3 years on average.
Yeah.
Now a 20 gets a bit more time. It sticks around for about 7.8 years. A 50, that jumps up to around 12.2 years.
Wow, so the higher the denomination, the longer it lasts.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
And the champion, the $100 bill, a whopping 22.9 years.
That's incredible. Must be all those international travelers keeping those hundreds in circulation.
Could be. Or maybe it's people stashing them away.
Yeah, good point.
Either way, it's fascinating how much the lifespan varies.
It really is.
Mhm.
Speaks volumes about how we use different
It
denominations.
does. Now let's talk about what those bills are actually made of, because it might surprise you. It's not actually paper like you'd find in a book.
I'm intrigued.
U.S. banknotes are made from this blend of 75% cotton and 25% linen.
Oh, wow. So it's more like fabric than paper.
Right. It's super durable. That's why those bills can withstand so much handling. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing says a single banknote can handle about 4,000 double folds. That's folding it back and forth repeatedly.
4,000. It's impressive.
I know, right? And it still won't tear. That's all thanks to that cotton and linen mix.
Makes sense.
Plus, they have those tiny little red and blue synthetic fibers woven in.
I've always wondered about those. I
I-
guess they add to the strength.
They do, and they're a key security feature, too. Makes counterfeiting much harder.
Oh, right, the security aspect.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got these tough little pieces of cotton and linen constantly moving through our economy.
Little workhorses.
But now let's switch gears a bit. One of the articles you shared, The Uncomfortable Truth About Money, really got me thinking about how we view money in terms of security.
Oh, yes, I
Um,
found that piece really thought-provoking.
Me too. It basically says that we often look to money for a sense of security and stability in our lives.
Which is completely understandable.
Right. But the article argues that money itself is actually tied to a lot of things that are fundamentally unstable. Like it points out how people might have felt pretty secure with decades of falling inflation.
Yeah, things seem predictable.
Right. Then, bam, the pandemic hits, and suddenly everything changes. Economic turmoil, job losses, you name it.
Exactly. That pandemic was such a stark reminder of how quickly things can shift.
It was. And the article says that even when things seem stable, there's always this underlying uncertainty. Your job could be at risk, your savings could be affected by the market, and even the political stability of a whole country can be fragile.
Yeah, it really highlights that sense of interconnectedness and how vulnerable we can be to events outside of our control.
It does. It's a bit unnerving when you think about it that way.
It is. It makes you question where we should really be placing our sense of security.
Mm-hmm.
If not solely on money, then what?
It's a big question, and one worth pondering, I think. Now let's zoom in on something a bit more down to earth. You included this YouTube transcript of someone reviewing a platform called Cashkick. Have you heard of it?
I have, yeah. It's one of those get paid to do stuff online
Yeah,
platforms.
exactly. And this review was really interesting because it gave a very real look at what it's actually like to try and earn money online through these kinds of things.
I imagine it's not quite as easy as some of those ads make it seem.
Not really. So the reviewer starts by creating a profile, right? And they earn $1 just for doing that, which takes them about 3 minutes.
Okay, that doesn't sound too bad.
Right. Seems pretty good. But then they start looking at the surveys they can take. And the pay is pretty low. Like one survey was 24 minutes long and paid 98 cents.
Well, so you're basically working for pennies.
Pretty much. There was another one for 15 minutes that paid 61 cents. So you start to see the time investment versus the reward.
It's not very motivating, is it?
Not really. The reviewer figured that after a couple of hours on the platform, you'd probably only earn around $5.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see why people might get disillusioned with that.
I think so too.
Yeah.
So while these platforms might be okay for earning a little extra cash if you have some spare time, they're definitely not a path to getting rich quick.
Or even making a decent hourly wage.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about the physical form of money and even dipped our toes into the world of online earning.
The very real and sometimes disappointing reality.
Right. But now let's step back and talk about the bigger picture. The very essence of money itself. How did we get to this system we have today?
Right. The history of money is fascinating. It's evolved so much over time.
It really has. One of the academic papers you shared traces this whole journey. It starts with people using actual commodities as money, like gold and silver.
That makes sense. Those things have inherent value.
Right. But it wasn't just precious metals. In different parts of the world, people used things like livestock, salt, even certain types of shells.
Shells, real.
Yeah. It all depended on what was considered valuable and useful in that particular society.
Makes sense.
But out of all these different things, gold seems to have become the most universally accepted form of money across different cultures and historical periods.
Yeah, I can see why. It's rare, it's durable, and it's relatively easy to transport.
Exactly. It doesn't corrode or rust like some other metals, and you can divide it into smaller units without losing its value.
Very practical for trade.
It was. But even with all those advantages, there were still problems.
Wow.
Like, imagine trying to transport a large amount of gold. It would be heavy, risky, a logistical nightmare.
I can imagine.
So people started looking for safer and more convenient alternatives.
Yeah, bet.
That's where goldsmiths and other trusted individuals came in.
Oh, interesting.
They had secure storage facilities so people would deposit their gold with them, and in return, they'd get a paper receipt.
So like a claim check for their gold.
Exactly. And those receipts, they promised to pay the bearer a certain amount of gold whenever they wanted it. And that, my friend, was a pivotal step towards the symbolic money we use today.
I see where you're going with this. So those paper receipts started circulating as a form of payment themselves.
They did. Because people trusted that they could always exchange them for actual gold.
It was a system built on trust.
It was. And that trust led to the paper itself being accepted as money, even though it didn't have any inherent value on its own.
It was a symbol representing the gold.
Right. Okay, so we moved from actual valuable commodities to paper that represented those commodities.
Fascinating how trust played such a key role.
It did. But now the question is, how did we end up with the fiat money system we use today, where the government basically decides what's valuable?
Right. That's a big shift.
It is. You included an article from the Hastings Business Law Journal that explains this whole thing. It talks about legal tender.
Yeah, I remember that term, but I'm a little fuzzy on the specifics.
Okay. Well, legal tender basically means that a creditor has to accept a specific form of money as payment for debts.
Ah, okay. So if $1 is legal tender, a store can't refuse to take it when you buy something?
Exactly. That legal backing is crucial for creating confidence and ensuring everyone accepts a particular currency.
Makes sense.
And that's the foundation of fiat money, which is what most of the world uses now, including us. But fiat money is different from that gold-backed money we were just talking about.
How so?
Well, fiat money doesn't have intrinsic value, like gold does.
I see. It's not valuable on its own.
Right. It's valuable because the government says it is.
And we all believe it will continue to be valuable.
Exactly. It's all about trust. Trust in the government and trust that other people will keep accepting it.
Makes you realize how much our financial system depends on collective belief.
It does. Okay. And this whole idea of moving away from a commodity like gold has a long and interesting history, especially here in the U.S.
Yeah. America's relationship with money has been a bit tumultuous.
It has. You know, the founding fathers, the guys who wrote the Constitution, they were really wary of paper money.
Oh, I bet. They'd seen the problems it could cause.
They had. During the Revolutionary War, there was all this paper money floating around, and it caused a lot of economic instability.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So they actually wrote into the Constitution that only gold and silver could be used to pay debts. They wanted a system based on something tangible, something real.
So they were trying to prevent the government from just printing money whenever they felt like it.
Exactly. They'd seen how that could lead to inflation and economic chaos.
The valuable lesson.
It was. But despite their best intentions, the U.S. monetary system has gone through a lot of changes over the years.
I can only imagine.
Yeah. In the mid-1800s, there was this period called the free banking era, where there was basically no national regulation of currency.
So each state was doing its own thing.
Pretty much. And it was a mess. Every state-chartered bank was issuing its own banknotes.
Wow, that must have been confusing.
It was. Imagine trying to travel or do business across state lines when everyone's using different types of money.
Yeah, a logistical nightmare.
It was. Then, when the Civil War broke out, the government needed a way to finance the war effort.
Wars are expensive.
They are. So in 1861, they started issuing these things called demand notes.
Demand notes.
Yeah. They were the first federally issued paper money since the Revolutionary War.
Interesting.
And get this, they were designed to be redeemable in gold.
Oh, so they were still tied to a commodity.
Right. And because they were green, people started calling them greenbacks.
Ah, the origin story of the greenback.
It is. And you know what? Those greenbacks are still considered legal tender today.
Wow, really?
Yep. Any paper money issued by the U.S. government since 1861 is technically valid. Pretty cool, huh?
That is pretty cool. A little piece of history is still in circulation.
It is. But the really big shift away from gold happened much later. In 1971 with President Nixon. Remember what he did?
Oh, yeah. He closed the gold window, right?
He did. Before that, foreign governments could exchange their U.S. dollars for gold. But Nixon put a stop to that.
A pretty bold move.
It was. And that was the end of the Bretton Woods system, which had tied the value of the dollar to gold. From then on, the dollar's value has been determined by market forces, not by a fixed amount of gold.
So a truly free-floating currency.
Exactly. And it was a huge departure from what the founding fathers had envisioned.
Yeah. No more gold standard.
Right. Which brings us to some of the historical warnings that came up in the articles.
The cautionary tales.
Right, like the hyperinflation in Weimar Germany.
Oh, yeah. That was a disaster.
It was. People needed wheelbarrows full of money just to buy basic things like bread and milk.
And I remember reading about people burning banknotes for heat.
Right.
Because they were worthless.
Yeah, it was that bad. And the article says it all started when Germany abandoned the gold backing of its currency during World War I.
And then they had those massive war reparations to pay.
Right. So the government just started printing more and more money. And as you can imagine, that led to runaway inflation.
A classic example of what can happen when a government prints too much money.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder of the dangers of an unbacked currency. There's also the story of John Law and the Mississippi Company in France back in the 1700s.
Oh, I've heard of that. Wasn't that a massive financial bubble?
It was. John Law came up with this scheme to issue paper money tied to the Mississippi Company. But it was all based on speculation, and the bubble eventually burst, causing widespread financial ruin. There were even riots in the streets.
So another example of the dangers of an unbacked or poorly managed currency.
Exactly. These historical examples really drive home the point that trust and stability are absolutely crucial for any monetary system, whether it's based on gold or something else.
Trust is the bedrock.
It is. Okay, let's fast forward to the present day and talk about the current landscape of payments.
The cash versus digital debate.
Right. You shared a report from Finmark South Africa that looked at how people use accounts in South Africa and Zimbabwe.
Yeah, it was fascinating to see the differences between those two countries.
It was. So in South Africa, there are these things called SASSA accounts. They're primarily used for social grant payments.
Okay.
But the thing is, they're really limited in terms of functionality. You can basically only use them for really basic transactions like buying airtime or electricity.
So not a full-fledged bank account.
Right. And because of those limitations, a lot of people just withdraw the entire grant amount in cash as soon as they get it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But you can't really use it for much else.
Exactly. Now, in Zimbabwe, things are a bit different. Mobile money is really popular there, and people use it for all sorts of things.
Oh, interesting. So they're leapfrogging traditional banking.
Kind of. And the report found that people who only use mobile money accounts tend to use the funds more actively. They don't just let it sit there.
So they're actively using it for transactions.
Right. And there's this great figure in the report that shows how often different types of transactions happen in South Africa.
Oh, yeah, the breakdown by account type.
Yeah. And it clearly shows that people with traditional bank accounts are way more likely to use their debit cards, set up recurring payments, pay bills electronically, send money digitally, you name it.
Compared to those who just have a SASA account.
Right. It highlights the difference in functionality between the two types of accounts.
Big time.
The report also asked people about what they like and dislike about digital payments.
The pros and cons from the user's perspective.
Right. And a lot of people said they appreciate the safety and security of digital payments.
Yeah, less risk of getting robbed.
Exactly. And they also like the convenience. Like it's super easy to send money to family members.
Especially if they live far away.
Right. But of course, there are drawbacks too.
I bet fees are a big one.
They are. In Zimbabwe, people prefer the transaction-based fees of mobile money over the fixed monthly fees that come with a bank account.
Especially if they don't have a regular income.
Yeah. And the report emphasized the importance of having a good network of mobile money agents. That makes it easier for people to deposit and withdraw cash.
Especially in areas without a lot of banks.
Right. So access and infrastructure are key factors in the adoption of digital payments.
Makes sense.
The report also talked about what motivates people to start using digital payments for the first time.
Oh, I'm curious about that.
Well, it seems like personal recommendations are a big influence. Like if a family member or friend tells you about a good experience they had.
Word of mouth.
Yeah. And bank tellers and mobile money agents can also play a role in encouraging people to try it out.
They're the frontline ambassadors.
They are. And of course, advertising and promotions can also help raise awareness and build trust.
Marketing has a role to play, too.
It does. Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about the ongoing debate around the role of physical cash.
The cash versus cashless society debate.
Exactly. You shared a report from the Bundesbank that really digs into this issue.
It's a timely topic for sure.
It is. So the report lays out some arguments against cash.
Like what?
Well, some people argue that cash makes it easier for illegal activities to happen, like in the shadow economy.
Yeah, the untaxed, under-the-table economy.
Right, and cash can be used to fund crime and terrorism because it's anonymous.
No paper trail.
Exactly. And that anonymity can also make it harder for central banks to do their job and control the money supply.
Interesting.
But the report doesn't just focus on the negatives, it also presents counter-arguments in favor of keeping cash.
Well, cash is still very practical for a lot of people.
It is, especially for those who might not have access to bank accounts or digital payment methods.
Right, the unbanked or underbanked.
Exactly. And some people are worried about the risks that come with a purely digital system, like what happens if there's a cyber attack or a major power outage.
The whole system could grind to a halt.
Exactly. And there are concerns about privacy, too. In a cashless society, every transaction could be tracked.
Big Brother is watching.
Right. So the debate is complex, and the report even points out that there's not a clear-cut correlation between cash usage and the size of the shadow economy.
So it's not as simple as saying more cash equals more illegal activity.
Exactly. They use the examples of Germany and Austria, which use a lot of cash but have relatively small shadow economies. And then there's Sweden, which has gone almost cashless but still has a decent-sized shadow economy.
So other factors are at play.
Definitely. The report also looked at the amount of cash used in terrorist attacks.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. And it turns out that the amounts are often relatively small, so it challenges the idea that getting rid of cash would stop terrorism.
Right. It's more complicated than that.
It is. And then there are the civil liberties concerns. Some people worry that limiting or abolishing cash would give the government too much power.
Yeah. The potential for abuse is there.
Right. They see cash as a way to protect their privacy and freedom.
Makes sense.
It does. And it's fascinating that even with the rise of digital payments, the amount of euro banknotes in circulation is still increasing.
People are still holding on to cash.
They are. Maybe it's because they see it as a safe haven in uncertain times.
Could be.
Or maybe it's just more convenient for certain transactions.
Could be a combination of factors.
Probably. The report also discusses the idea of setting limits on how much cash you can use in a single transaction.
Oh yeah, cash thresholds.
Right. Some countries have already done this.
It's a controversial topic.
It is. Some people think it would help combat crime.
But others see it as an infringement on their freedom.
Exactly. And there's also the argument about whether cash gets an unfair advantage. because there aren't any direct transaction fees for consumers.
So it's implicitly subsidized compared to things like card payments.
Right. But figuring out how to price all payment methods fairly is a complex issue.
For sure.
It is. And even central banks that are exploring digital currencies, like those in Sweden and England, still see cash as having a role to play.
This is not going away anytime soon.
It seems that way. Okay, we have one more topic to cover: corporate cash holdings.
Ah, yes. Companies hoarding cash.
Right, we have a couple of papers that touch on this, and it turns out there are several reasons why companies hold on to so much cash.
Like a rainy day fund.
Kind of. It's partly about having a buffer in case of unexpected expenses or to be able to jump on opportunities when they arise.
Makes sense.
And sometimes it's about access to financing. It can be expensive or difficult for a company to borrow money quickly, so having cash on hand is helpful.
Right.
And of course, companies need cash to fund growth and investments.
The fuel for expansion.
Exactly. And there's been this trend of companies holding more and more cash in recent years.
I've read about that. Wonder why it's happening.
Well, the research suggests it could be due to economic uncertainty, changes in business models, or shifts in investment opportunities.
A lot of moving parts.
There are. And interestingly, public companies tend to hold more cash than private companies.
I guess that has to do with shareholder pressure and things like that.
Probably. Okay, so as you can see, money is so much more than just those numbers in your bank account or the bills in your wallet.
Yeah, we've just scratched the surface.
We have. It's got this fascinating history, this intricate legal framework, and it plays a constantly evolving role in our society and the global economy. From the surprisingly short lifespan of a $10 bill to the ongoing debate about cash versus digital payments and even the strategic decisions behind corporate cash holdings, there's always something new to discover about money.
It's been a really thought-provoking deep dive.
It has. And it leaves us with a big question for you, our listener. Considering the continued demand for physical cash alongside the rise of digital payments, what do you think the future of money will look like?
Right.
Will we still be using those cotton and linen bills in 50 years? Or will everything be digital? And what are the implications of either scenario?
Big questions indeed.
They are, and one's worth pondering. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of money and want to hear more explorations of fascinating topics, make sure to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive. Your support helps us keep bringing you these deep dives into the knowledge that matters.
We appreciate it.
We do, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Sounds good.